Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Ecom Pulse podcast. I'm your host, Eitan Koter. I have a special guest today, Carl Boutet. Welcome, Carl. How are you?
I am great and excited to be here and jam all things e-commerce and such a rapidly evolving place that we're all trying to keep up with.
Sure. So, Carl, thank you so much. I mean, we've been trying to schedule this for a while, and obviously, it was very important for me to have you on the show with all your background and history. So, why don't we start for you telling the audience about who you are, about your professional background, and you can start whenever you want that you feel is relevant, for this.
So you don't want me to go back to my days of being a paper boy and working in the corner store?
Everyone has a story. Everything is important. Right?
I guess my real retail, although I did have quite a few project or jobs before that, but I guess my real retail career started with my own national retail project across Canada, launching the first wave of wireless, and how that sort of extends into our conversation possibly today was one of those projects within that time, which was launching Cantel with Price Club, which is now Rogers and Costco.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to be sort of a third party, or one of the first third party members of Costco.ca as they were lifting up in the early 2000s their e-commerce. I sort of saw that being built out, and actually most of the role I played there wasn't actually digital. It was actually on the supply chain side, because they didn't really know how to manage, and we had some infrastructure in place already supporting our own store network. So we leveraged that to sort of support their first steps into e-com and direct drop ship. So that was my beginning in e-commerce, and then sort of evolved over the years and helped businesses of all sizes navigate the quote unquote digital transformation, which in large part meant sort of finding their way into e-commerce, or as I also like to call it, e-influence. And then then I've basically spent the last 7 years with my own advisory work with Studio RX, where I work with retailers, again, of all sizes around the world, and as well with technology providers, helping them better navigate the retail waters. And last but not least, still importantly, gotten more into teaching and working with next generation in the last few years at McGill University and the Asian Institute of Technology.
Yeah. I mean, so you are using all your experience, and you like teaching, you like sharing your knowledge, consulting. Any special reason why you took this route? I mean, how come you're so passionate about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know where exactly it comes from. I think I enjoy the energy. I think if you're going to work in this space and sort of touch on innovation, which is kind of the general catalyst of all this, is you need to stay close to the new ideas, and they tend to emerge from the newer generation. So I think it's a win-win for me. I definitely get a lot out of teaching and sharing and getting that back in spades. And also one of the reasons why I've invested some considerable amount of my time also in Asia at the Institute of Technology, teaching digital marketing and analytics there. Because as we know, Asia is a fascinating marketplace when it comes to retail technology and consumer behavior. So and then here at McGill, we have a part of the group that stood up the Retail Innovation Lab as well. So it's full circle. I guess it's as much I enjoy sharing as I enjoy learning, and it comes together.
Sure. So you mentioned you're advising to McGill Retail Innovation Club, and obviously you're teaching. So tell us more about the Retail Innovation Lab. I mean, what are the things that you're working on?
So the McGill Retail Innovation Lab was announced back in 2017, which is how I got involved with the school in the first place, just sort of supporting it from afar and looking at exploring different opportunities, as I was actually in the process of looking to stand up a retail lab in Montreal, because we have a lot of retail technologies here as well. Not as many as where you are, but we aspire to that maybe one day. And then when the school was announced through the Benson School of Retail Management, and that there would be a portion of the school that would be dedicated to a lab, that's how I first got involved. And we were looking at different projects, sort of sandbox concepts, and then along came a group called Alimentation Couche-Tard, which in the rest of the world is known as Circle K, which is sort of the second largest convenience store chain in the world after 7-Eleven, but is, touches on a bunch of different aspects. And so we became sort of their retail innovation lab in many ways. They have others, but sort of fully dedicated is the one where we focus more on frictionless checkout and that, some of the new technologies that they're exploring. So fun to be a part of that. I'm not really part of the day-to-day of that operation, but I'm close to it and sharing a lot of the knowledge from that as well.
Amazing. And this is something that the students there are researching and analyzing, or just is like an ecosystem of tech startups, or is it both?
Yeah, it's not quite an ecosystem, but there are some startups, some Montreal startups. Shout out to C2RO that's in the computer vision space that are in there helping with some of the analytics that the researchers are definitely using. So it's mostly for our PhD and postdoc students that are writing, doing research and writing papers around different consumer behavior subjects, and some of it can be predictive modeling that our friends like Maxime Cohen, who's actually a graduate from Tel Aviv, came. He's actually one of our co-directors. We have a lot of computer vision stuff. Obviously, is front and center, but pricing, demand prediction, path to purchase, sustainability and health. We have a medical school, so that's always interesting to see how we can combine these different departments and what they're looking into around food access and how to nudge healthier consumption patterns and things like that. So there's a ton of research. We could share a white paper that we sort of broke down some of the, distilled some of that research and make that, it's widely available. So happy to share that link with your audience.
Yes, it's very, very interesting. Please share it. We put it in the show notes. And I'm really, really, super interested about your time in Asia, right? And I know you spent time in China. You even, been there before COVID broke up, right? In Wuhan, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was literally sort of the beginning of my great acceleration, which is a book I wrote on the topic of how digital transformation sort of really sped up and imposed on us by the factors that the pandemic brought upon. But I was in China in mid-January 2020, literally a couple of days before Wuhan.
Wow.
Booked. I was in Shanghai. But that was, I spend most of my time in Southeast Asia. So I teach, the main campus is based in Bangkok, and the satellite campus that I teach at are in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh, and in Hanoi. So, it's just amazing to see sort of the whole ecosystem, and I'm sure we'll get into sort of what those platforms can look like, and the whole rise of super apps and live shopping obviously played a really big part in that.
Exactly. And we know that Asia market is a few years ahead of North American market in terms of e-commerce, adoption, e-commerce in general, definitely volumes. And, in this podcast, we talk a lot about shoppable video, live shopping, and I think it's one of the key drivers definitely in Asia. So what are the, what have you learned there? What are the trends that you see there that, how do you see they're being adopted, in the Western world?
So, I mean, I think it's important to sort of not lump all Asia in the same basket, because Asia is massive and there's a lot of parts to it. So there's China, which is at that 50% e-commerce rate, which is mind-boggling, and it's has much to do with Alibaba and JD.com and these sort of the platforms and the whole infrastructure that they've brought that have and the density of the populations they have that have made all this sort of business model work a lot more efficiently than we've seen in other parts of the world. So not to say that it's easily be replicated easily wherever else outside of China, but that's sort of the high watermark, which is easily twice as much as probably the next best. Then you have the rest of Asia, which is, I guess we could qualify mainly in under the emerging markets framework, which is fascinating.
Yes.
I've also paid a lot of attention to those in Latin America, Africa, but I had this opportunity to spend more time in Southeast Asia, which allows you to leapfrog certain elements. So take a lot of the lessons learned that the quote unquote developed countries have worked through over decades and sort of just jump right to best of breed. And we've seen things like with Shopee. In Southeast Asia, which is a shopping super app, obviously Lazada as well. That's part of the Alibaba ecosystem. So they're close to China. They have that influence. They're able to see it more clearly. Now, what needed to catch up are the logistics and the payment processing and all the other sort of connective tissues of e-commerce that are in the background, but are crucial to making even the sexiest of technology work, right? I could have the best go-to-market e-com technology. If I don't have the back end to support it, it becomes really, really troubling. And one such market I actually spent quite a bit of time not in, but studying and working with from afar. It was Nepal. I had some friends there, actually, that were tied to the Asian Institute of Technology, who went back to Kathmandu at the beginning of the pandemic, and you saw this explosion. When I talk about great acceleration, this was definitely one of those markets where, for example, digital payment just went through the roof. It was pretty much unexistent before the pandemic and had to rapidly catch up and again go best of breed with companies like Daraz, which is another e-commerce platform that's part of the Lazada ecosystem for emerging markets. So you witness all this with the logistics and everything else. So the platforms, is for them is sort of the easy piece. It's everything else in these massive populations. Obviously, Vietnam's 100 million people, right? So these are big markets with
big numbers,
a rising middle class too. That is a big piece of why e-commerce has risen so quickly in China.
Yes. I'm sure like in the US, right, North America, you see different communities around different, apps, right? So you have any brands who want to distribute today, you need to take into consideration, the Meta application, right? And then TikTok and you have Amazon and of course all the different marketplaces, and you have, the Snap organization. And I mean, it's like communities around. It's so complex, right? And like in Asia, there one app, like you mentioned the Lazada or the Shopee, they're able to consolidate, huge amount of people under their environment with this super app. So I guess it's really different, right? The environment and the
less
the way
fragmented.
that's from Brighton and the way they organize themselves around communities here, and it's definitely a different journey.
It's a different approach too, because I think here one of the reasons, especially when we think about the marketplace approach with Amazon or even using Walmart or Tesco, or depending on what different parts of Carrefour of the world you are, you almost feel like there's a bit of a holdback because you're like, I'm supporting my competitor in some ways, possibly, right? Especially if I'm a retail brand, or I want to be careful because there's been a lot of pushback on. Well, we see Amazon in front of the Department of Justice in the U.S. and we're on some anti-competitive issues. So we want to, the brands are a bit like, well, shouldn't I? Whereas in China, Alibaba doesn't, it's a platform. It doesn't compete. When you talk about the super apps, obviously, WeChat and the whole Tencent ecosystem is you can't live without that in China. Or so the WePay, Alipay, all these things, but they're not seen as competitive. Shopee, the same thing in Southeast Asia. They're just seen as platforms, sort of like Shopify is seen, here in North America. They won't go out and start selling their own products like Amazon will, or private label products like, the Walmarts and everybody else too, that could leverage that data. So there's always a bit of a back and forth now. Snap doesn't have that, Meta doesn't have that, Google doesn't have that, but they were so fragmented again that there's sort of this need to sort of tie that all together and make it easy for the brands to quickly reach those customers without having to go through each channel individually.
Yes, correct. Right. Specifically, if you want to elaborate more on the shoppable video, right, opportunity, and obviously, I'm differentiating between live shopping and let's call it, video commerce, right? I think it's a different thing. There's a different opportunity and market characteristics. So, I mean, being there both in China and Southeast Asia, and obviously living in North America, how do you see, the transition from Asia to the Western world by all these, shoppable tools? Yeah.
Yeah, especially China. I mean, Southeast Asia is quite high as well. I think, there's the whole entertainment aspect that is big and sort of the reflex. I think we we tend to use e-commerce more as a utility in the West. Like we see it as sort of a very convenient, easy way to make
impulse
a
purchase. Yeah.
Whereas in the East, or especially China, it's sort of, I want to be entertained, so I'm going to kind of go through these channels, be it Tmall or Shopee Video or whatever, that will sort of inspire me and make it a lot more interesting. As much as I might want to watch a TV show, they'll watch Shoppable Video as a way to be entertained, and then the consumption will sort of trigger off of that. So that's why you have these KOLs, right? That are these key opinion leaders that are massive in these markets that are drawing crowds. I remember a statistic in China where, I think this is already 2 years ago, where the top KOL was generating more revenue than Carrefour was at the time, when they're the largest foreign platform in China, right?
Yeah.
So one influencer, obviously with a massive team behind them, but could generate that kind of revenue. So there's clearly a place, and I mean, I'd like to get the conversation maybe even towards something I've been calling iCommerce for a while, immersive commerce, because I think there's this catch up too around the technology and the tools that we need to make this also more of a reality.
Yes.
But there's definitely a trend towards more immersive, richer content, more dynamic. I think we're thankfully starting to get away now from the 2D sort of static web page e-commerce into something, hopefully it's a lot more exciting, more
3D, more immersive type of experience, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And also, you see the efforts TikTok are making, trying to, push, North American, consumers to push. Initially, they were trying to position themselves as an entertainment platform, then obviously as a search platform, and I think they've been very successful in both. But now they are claiming that every video in TikTok can be shoppable, right? So, I mean, is it too much? Entertainment is more kind of a lean back type of experience, and actually making a purchase is more, energetic or lean forward type of experience. I think this, use cases of human behaviors that needs to be proven, right?
Yeah, I mean, TikTok is been on everybody's lips for the last 12, 24 months, especially in North America, where they've been trying to make entry into the market. I believe they're probably underestimating the logistics component, because they're trying to set up sort of their own 3PL system and partner with different logistics companies. And it's hard. I mean, that's one piece that Amazon clearly has nailed. But they're missing the whole inspiration part, whereas TikTok is all inspiration. And the key word you said earlier, can be shoppable. Let's just hope it's not. The idea is we don't want it to become
it's going to be something else. Yeah, it's going to be like
still need to find that balance. But don't forget, everybody's path to monetization and profitability, regardless of the platform, is consumption, right? So the idea that you can become a vehicle or a conduit for consumption is at a certain point you have to get there. If you want to keep growing and showing top line revenue growth, you have to forge a path to that reality that you are going to be a consumption aggregator of some sort. So it depends from which end you're starting. I think where TikTok is starting from is really interesting, and you're seeing different partnerships, different. So they know, and their algorithms are incredibly powerful. They have probably the best influence algorithms out there. So that's what everybody's expecting now. Geopolitics come into play, especially in North America. I suspect there will be something at some point there, and will logistics definitely be a complexity that so far is just not in their. It's just not in the way they seem to think. I think for them it's sort of that's easy stuff, and they see how it played out in China. The reality is it's North America and Western the Western world doesn't have the same logistical realities that China has.
Yes. And specifically for some of the retail trends that you've been discussing about the blurring of digital and physical. What do you see in this omni-channel, and phygital, type of trends?
Yeah, that's been a key theme of mine for a decade now. Is this idea that we spend a lot of time, I'm guilty of this as well, of sort of talking in either or, or framing it as either or. And this is physical commerce, this is digital commerce or e-commerce or whatever. And often sharing statistics that sort of show that dichotomy. and that it's sort of that it's one or the other, when the reality is it's one plus the other. Yes, there are some digital, native whatever brands that will continue to live predominantly in digital, but they're less and less. They've realized that they need those physical channels to even just build brand equity.
Yeah.
But I think obviously the contrary has been even more true, where the physical first brands and retailers have needed, strong digital muscles. And that's the way the analogy I tend to make is this whole body analogy, where it's like, if you just had a strong right arm and your left arm was useless, you need, how resilient would your body be, and how could you sort of deal with the shocks that the market can send your way, which we saw the pandemic was clearly a massive shock that destabilized probably 80% of retailers that just weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
The 20% that were, though, and I'm just throwing that in a number just because it's usually like a Pareto thing, but they clearly benefited massively. I'll give the example here in the furniture industry of Wayfair, that was really struggling up until the pandemic.
Okay.
And when the pandemic hit, well, obviously they were perfectly positioned to furnish the homes that everybody was stuck in, because they were built on that premise. Whereas some of the more traditional furniture retailers, who'd been saying for the past decade, nobody buys a couch online, got caught a little flat-footed. So now, and I'm using that almost as a caricature, but it's true, right? So what are those investments? What are those reflexes? And how do we get to this blur where we stop sort of focusing on what sets them apart and really put our energy into what makes one and the other better? And that's why I've been talking about, why I talk sort of facetiously about the 50-50 of blurring of physical and digital, so that we get to that point, we stop talking about it, right? Because we're not going to even see the difference. It's going to become almost irrelevant how we differentiate them, because it's just the same path to purchase. And every day we see new examples of that showing up.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because you see retailers are trying to introduce physical experiences to digital journeys, right?
Yeah.
And also on the offline location, like the actual stores, with retail media, they're trying to excel and elaborate, and elevate digital experience with, digital signage and QR codes and experience like that. Obviously, it's pushed by tech. I guess I know there are a lot of technologies around, all these, digital to physical migrations and integrations, and it's interesting. It's interesting, and I think there is a really a demand for that also from shoppers, having this mixed reality of experiences.
And it's gonna be fascinating going forward, Eitan, because I don't know about you, but if you have kids and you see around you how they consume media in the way that they engage with these immersive environments, be it fully virtual in some cases, to sort of augmented or whatever. I mean, for them, it's really natural, right? And the factor in here that we tend to forget, because you're right, it is technologically driven as well, is Moore's law, right? Is the fact that the compute just keeps on going up and up. The cost of that compute keeps going down and down. And it just makes these experiences more and more cost effective and richer at the same time, which means at some point, something's going to give. Now, we're talking today is, the talk of the town is Vision Pro and these things. I mean, we're still not there yet, but but you can start seeing clearer and clearer where this is all kind of headed. And that's what I keep when I do a lot of speaking as well. I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I've asked in most of my conferences, I mean, how many people here in this room of 500, 1,000, whatever, believe that 5 years from now, commerce is going to be less digitally influenced?
Wow. That's a good one.
I haven't seen a hand go up yet.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Does it mean now, like, people are like, but people still like to shop in store? Obviously, they still love to shop in store. I hope they do. And I mean, that's again back to the dichotomy. Well, if it's that it's a zero sum. No, these are complementary. So the idea is, if the path to purchase is going to be more digitized, which again, nobody's raised their arm. I'm looking forward to the day somebody says, no, I think we're and there are going to be concepts that are actually going to be countercurrent, as there always is, but the majority of it is going to grow, and we'll see that that path to purchase, when we say more digitized, things like shoppable video obviously is a part of that. Just this richer, more immersive, the i-commerce thing again coming more and more to fruit, with better hardware, better software, better bandwidth, better everything, right? So it's just like, if you're betting against that, if you're betting that those things aren't going to happen, that we're not going to have better software, we're not going to have better hardware, and we're not going to have better bandwidth and processing, I don't know if I want to be on that end of the bet.
Yeah, correct. I mean, there's another version, interesting use case for that is like social shopping. Again, not purchasing or in the social networks, but inviting your friends to purchase together with you in kind of a immersive environment.
Shopping, and, that's a great point. I mean, at the core, shopping, especially the way we've seen it in the last 50 years since sort of the rise of the middle class and having more leisure and time, is very much a social activity, right? And that was one of the pushbacks when people were sort of talking about, well, e-commerce is going to eat the world. Is like, well, people like to be together. People like to shop together. So is there going to be these, is technology going to facilitate that in the way that my kids are coming together virtually with their friends and doing things virtually? Are they going to be doing more of that? I mean, I hope they're still going to be physically getting together as well too. God forbid that everybody stays in their basements and this turns into Wall-E. But it's more the idea that, again, you can't bet against the technology, and it's sort of irrelevant because as the technology becomes more and more a part of our being, like, we don't want to get too sci-fi here, but as the things sort of, the glasses get better and the audio gets better and everything becomes more contextual. I mean, I think, and like we haven't even used the word, I think we're probably the first podcast in the last 2 years not to use the word AI in 10 minutes.
And metaverse, maybe.
Well, I said VR, so it's sort of, a little metaversey there for a second, but I mean, you can't completely discount all that. So again, I'm not suggesting that it's all going to be, and there's going to be some really cool farmers markets out there. They're going to basically not even allow you to walk into them with any sort of digital device on you because they want you to live some sort of very organic experience. But is that going to be the majority of what we're going to be living through in 5-10 years from now? I don't think so.
So, Carl, I mean, we're going to a cookieless world where there is like a dramatic shift, right, in the way advertisers are targeting. And obviously, the online retailers are able to provide this first-party data. And the retail media is emerging. It's a real, business and opportunity these days. And
massive.
I mean, how do you see these two, dramatic shifts are, evolving?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about preparing for Cookieless for some time now, and it's funny because it doesn't seem like the sky has fallen yet.
No, I mean, you see Facebook ads are, I mean, it's growing. I mean, in the latest, report, analyst report, I mean, their overall revenues are increasing and post Cookieless world. So interesting.
Yeah, well, let's remind. I think right now for Chrome, it's less than 5% that they've actually pulled the cookies from. So it's not all done yet. But let's use that though as an incentive and an important one to drive sort of the first party data behavior that we've seen with the rise of actually rich loyalty programs, not just I'm collecting your data and giving you a irrelevant coupon in exchange. Like, let's get some really good reasons to offer and collect that first party data. So that is definitely part of it. So the platforms, you're right. I mean, I think that's a trend we don't want to get away from. I think we want to make sure that we're delivering on that value and collecting the data that in a way that it's safe and respects all the sort of contextual constraints, but that is still for both parties, for the brand and the consumer. And then how that sort of relates to retail media is that's going to be really fascinating to see, because again, Amazon's blown our minds, right? $47 billion. And you recognize that's the same revenue that I just gave you a furniture example earlier. You know that's the revenue of the largest furniture retailer in the world. And they do that in retail media. I'm referring to IKEA's global revenues, $47 billion. So Amazon, just with their retail media, is matching IKEA's revenue. I mean, just think about that. And by the way, and it's growing at a way faster.
It's great. The trajectory is huge. I mean, it's very, very intense. It's going up and up and up. And even before discussing, the big screens, CTVs. I mean, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Netflix, Disney.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see the integration of these shoppable experiences? In
well,
big
here's
screens?
the thing. I mean, obviously it's huge, and it's going to be, when I talk about immersive commerce, this is all part of it, right? It's the idea that it's just going to be more native. It's just going to feel more organic. It's just going to, work its way through in ways that are more interesting, quite honestly, and into our lives. So that's the upside. I think that's really important, and brands are going to have to be there. That's not an if, it's they have to be there. It's pretty hard to be a global brand today and not have some sort of retail media strategy with Amazon and Walmart and some of these. Like right now, you'd be crazy not to make it part of your book. Now, two things I'm concerned about, and maybe my concerns are overblown, but the first one is I want to make sure that it's not a tax. Because what I'm reading right now with Amazon specifically is it's like a pay to play. And now we even have with this Rufus AI thing, it's getting a little confusing, like what's what and all that. But I think brands are feeling like it's not, they're doing it not because they necessarily want to, but they have to. Because if they don't do it, if they don't invest, and that's part of that 47 billion and the 15 billion, by the way, just in the last quarter. So if they keep tracking at that, I mean, we'll see that number obviously go up, way up still. So the brands feel like it's almost being imposed on them, which is an issue. The second one, and this is probably even more true in physical space, because we talk about retail media a lot and very much in a digital landscape. It's a digital asset that's going to also be, back to my blurring, in physical environments, right? So Walmart has more traffic, if you count foot traffic and digital traffic, than Amazon has. So they're going to want to monetize that.
Yes.
My second concern is how, making sure that experience, which is, shoppable video obviously has I think an advantage because the production quality hopefully will be better. But I don't want it to turn into a sports stadium with just logos all over the place that don't really add value. It just feels like a monetization play. So I want to make sure that they're rich and that they make sense. And I've spoken to some retailers about retail media, and they're sort of keeping their distance because they're worried that it's going to detract from the experience, the overall experience, where the merchandising teams and all have worked really hard to create these beautiful environments. And the retail media is going to feel sort of kind of crowbarred in because it's a revenue opportunity that they don't want to miss. That has to be done sort of strategically with the right intentions, but it's unavoidable because it's a revenue channel that Amazon and Walmart and others are going to be showing us now that you're going to just fall further and further behind if you don't do it. It's not like cloud. I mean, cloud, AWS was the only few companies that Walmart didn't spin up their own cloud business, but this they can do. So anybody that has some sort of captive market, and then will be interesting is the whole rise of the networks, the people, the aggregators.
Yes.
We'll see where they go as well.
Yes. Oh, it's interesting. I mean, companies definitely are looking for the sweet spot, right? I mean, trying to maximize, let's say, income opportunities, but on the other hand, maintain brand, loyalty.
Want to control. Yeah. I'll go back to my old friends at Costco. They've been very good at. They've had actually their own retail media network. They didn't call it that for a long time, where there's all the content that shows up on their TV screens when you go through the warehouse. It's their content. They're not using. Well, sometimes they'll maybe use a manufacturer's like 8K whatever demo, but most of the time they're sort of showing a lot of their own sort of productions and stuff. So I think controlling that, making sure that you're like with shoppable video, you want to make sure that it's on brand, right? You want to make sure that you're not doing something that doesn't represent who it is you are, what you're about. So making sure you're not just jumping on the bandwagon without thinking through sort of the content quality that actually adds value, and there's just not one more opportunity to monetize your customer.
Interesting times, huh?
Oh, well, that's what I love. You talked about why I'm interested in next generation, but why am I interested in this? Why my energy for this sector comes from that is the fact that it's always evolving. There's always new opportunities. They're not all created equal. They're not made for everybody, but there's some underlying trends you just cannot avoid. And we're really entering a new era here. I mean, when I talk about the rise of retail networks and sort of artificial intelligence, or what that's going to play into all this, I mean, it's like saying 20 years ago, you were excited to announce you have a website. I mean, do you know any retailer or brand today that's going around talking how excited they are about having a website? Or like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, saying we have electricity. I mean, these are like fundamental sort of stages that we're going through.
Sure. Carl, I know you talk a lot about the Retail Innovation Index. You want to share with us what exactly you mean?
So the Retail Innovation Index, or are you talking about
like the emerging business models, right? And the Retail Innovations Index that you mentioned.
Yeah. So It's the Retail Relevance Index, I think maybe you're referring to, not the Innovation Index, the Retail Relevance Index.
Relevance Index, okay.
Yeah, so it's a model that I've been working on also for almost close to a decade as well, where I've been really interested in not just what it is to sort of keep up with innovation.
Let's stop right 1 second, sorry, Carl. So let's do that again. I'll just mark here. Clip. So it's the Retail Relevance Index, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the Retail Relevance Index for the past decade...
Let me ask you, sorry.
Go ahead.
Carl, okay. Carl, I know you talk a lot about the Retail Relevance Index. Please share with us what it really means.
Yeah, so as much as I've been sort of studying and talking about the blurring of digital physical and how we leverage emerging technologies to remain relevant in general to our consumer base and our target market, I also have been interested by the idea of what actually does relevance mean? Like, how do I remain relevant through the lens of differentiation? And the index basically measures 4 quadrants of differentiation, which was being inspired by some research done out of Wharton University at University of Pennsylvania by Professor Barbara Kahn, who sort of studied these 4 attributes. I've massaged that a bit. I've put some measurements behind it, and basically seeing these 4 attributes are pretty straightforward. They're price, convenience, delight, and purpose. So how are you differentiating, and how are you using technology? Back to this, what I was just saying about making sure you're not just throwing retail media out there because it's the thing to do. You want to make sure it's on brand. Well, part of being on brand is how do you differentiate? How do you remain relevant to your customer base in a way that's true and authentic to yourself? So the Retail Relevance Index, the RRI, is basically about measuring that, or even just using it as a perceptual tool to have discussions internally with senior leadership and say, okay, are we staying the course? Is this where we want to be? Do we need to shift the course? Do we need to add some attributes? Are we being overly penalized than others? So how do you think about price, convenience, delight, and purpose as ways of remaining relevant to your customer base?
How audience can find more information about this index?
I'm pretty present on LinkedIn, so I would encourage them to reach out on LinkedIn, and happy to share some more content. I wrote that book, The Great Acceleration, but I don't have it on any major platform. I usually keep it for my audiences, and so it's something kind of exclusive. But I'm happy if anybody's interested in learning more about the tool and how to use it, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and happy to give them more information.
Carl, let's talk about the book, The Great Acceleration.
Yep.
I mean, I know you wrote it, and there is some a lot of insights and knowledge. Maybe you can just give us the highlights of what you wrote there and what's coming.
Well, it sort of ties everything together, right? I mentioned the China January 2020. I'd been thinking about working on a book mostly framed in the Retail Relevance Index and that differentiation strategy, and then I was sort of at the forefront of this great acceleration. It's a term I believe, anyway, I was the first one, I think, to coin it in April of 2020, just because I was actually part of a friend's book launch virtual, Steve Dennis, who was launching Remarkable Retail, and we were hosting it for him, and we had this discussion again, April 2020. We're like the beginning of lockdown still, and we're already trying to reflect with there was a panel with Scott Galloway, and there was Seth Godin there as well, and we're just like, what can be the implications of this pandemic, in terms of retail and consumption? And that's where I came out with this notion that we've had the Great Depression, we've had the Great Recession. Could we? And the word acceleration was on everybody's lips. Everybody was sort of pulling forward these investments that they were planning on doing around more digitizing a greater part of the path to purchase. So I said, could we look back on this era as the Great Acceleration? Because a lot of budgets were shifting, so on. So that's where the sort of thesis for the book was. I didn't want it to just come from me, so I went out and interviewed a bunch of really smart people from all sectors of business, talking about how did they perceive the acceleration, from real estate to sustainability to technology to obviously all being the common denominator being retail. And the subtitle of the book was The Race to Retail Resilience, because the idea was, okay, we got caught off guard this time. How do we not get caught off guard next? Because that's what I still am going around talking about. Is saying, this was a warning shot, and a brutal one that really rattled us to the core. but it doesn't necessarily have to be a health pandemic. It can be geopolitical, which, or it could be climate change. Like there's a lot of these shocks that keep on hitting our organizations that we kind of got to pass on this last one because nobody really saw it coming except for probably Asia, which were better prepared, especially China, although they didn't necessarily manage it perfectly either. But all to say that now it's like, if you're the CEO of one of these organizations and we get hit by something, it could be physical or digital. It can come from both sides. That's why the body needs to be strong. Well, this book was sort of written to sort of help them think that through. And we were charting a lot of different sort of impacts along the way, and not just looking at e-commerce, but sort of the ecosystems of the click and collect and the different fintech sort of things that sort of rose from that. So it's sort of a larger picture. Now I'm working on the next book, which is going to be focusing more on sort of what are we not seeing from these emerging technologies, or what are we discounting too frivolously, like the rise of e-commerce, where a lot of people sort of roll their eyes now and say, oh, well, here we go. Your crypto, metaverse, AI babble. Well, listen, there's something in there. And if you're just, there's some things worth paying attention to, maybe not for the reasons that you think.
Amazing. Carl, on a personal note, can you share with us something about yourself that most people in your professional network don't know?
Well, you want me to get personal here? Well, listen, I mean, I if I get on the personal side, I just, I do enjoy the next, this, you asked about the next generation. I have three, older teenage kids, young adults, trying to create an environment, a world that hopefully is beneficial. I think we focus a lot on technology. We have to sort of make sure that we keep a big picture around that.
Yes.
And I do support a lot of sustainability initiatives too, and sustainable retailing, especially. So, I mean, I don't know if that's truly personal, but I think that's sort of, I try to keep some sort of balance where I'm not just seen as a technologist for technology's sake, but how do we keep this all in sort of in equilibrium? Back to the notion that there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. I mean, Moore's law is advancing, or whatever law it's going to become once that one tops out. So that's where I think the personal side is. I'm trying to find this balance. And when I teach emerging technologies and new business models, I try to bring also around privacy and how we leverage data and these things that collect and leverage data. So I try to bring that to my students as well, this sort of this sensitivity to, maybe it's just with being in business for 30 years, seeing sort of finding this balance. It's not all in or all out. And that's where maybe back to my blurring, I'm very much into equilibrium.
Yes. And I hear we have plenty of topics probably for the next part 2 of the episode. So, wow.
Absolutely.
It was really, really fascinating, Carl. Thank you so much. So where is the best place to find you?
LinkedIn. I mean, I'm a power LinkedIn user. I'm pretty responsive on it. If anybody that has engaged with me on it could tell you, including yourself. So let's, link to Carl Boutet on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find me.
Great, Carl. Thank you so much. Wish you all the best.
Likewise.
Great year.
Be well.